This is a video about the medieval spiked blunt arrowhead of the mid-14th century. It's often depicted on a lot of manuscripts, and quite often I'm sure they would have been made entirely of wood. These are some that I've made, and they're absolutely fantastic for shooting in a domestic setting, for safety, but also for roving because they don't drive deeply into the ground. This one's been shot thousands of times and it's taken some real abuse. This is an example of an antler version, Scandinavian, and they come in a variety of sizes. But I think there's also something else going. If you look at this high status woman from the Smithfield Decretals, she's probably got some metal at the end of her hunting arrow, and that's an extant example from Scandinavia. Perhaps this is something as ubiquitous as a medieval spike nail that would have been made in their millions, made in a couple of heats, So I thought of a design that could use a medieval nail with no glues and just using the properties of green wood shrinking onto the shaft. So the first stage in making these simple objects is just to taper the bar and then to rivet over the head. You can use a head, or I'm just doing it there in the vise. So these have been made, as I say, in their millions for medieval buildings. For the part of the blunt arrow, I'm using some hazel. Now this was cut when the sap was down, but it is actually green, so I'm just paring off the byword because hazel has quite a big pith channel down the middle, and that's where the central part of the blunt where the nail will be located. So I'm sure that these would be made on a pole lathe during the period, and not electric lathe obviously, but this is what I have to hand, and it's essentially the same process. So I'm just turning it down and incising some decorative lines. The medieval mind loved decoration, polishing it up with some of the shavings. Here I'm driving down the nail, so it's a nice snug fit, and as that dries that will really grip on. The inscribed lines on the blunts have also been interestingly interpreted as vegetable fibre reinforcement. 14th century arrows are usually depicted with bulbous self-nocks. I don't think these are that naturalistic. This is from about 100 years later, which is maybe a more realistic representation. It's essential you get the grain orientation correct, and it has to go transversely against the annular rings. This bulbous style of self-nock is actually quite labour intensive compared to the later medieval designs that used horn slivers to reinforce, so it's easy to see why that was adopted. In a previous video I reduced a log down to a 1/2 inch stock, so if you want to have a look at that you can refer to that for reference. So I've now finished the shaft, and it goes from 1/2 inch at the shoulder to 1/2 inch at the self-nock, and then tapers down to 3/8 at its narrowest point. I'm just cutting in the nocks there, filing them out, and then what I'll do is I'll burnish it to remove any sharp edges so there's no undue wear and tear on the string. I'm fitting the head up, and I'll carry on shrinking down and make a super tight fit that's completely waterproof. 14th century arrows are often depicted with shorter fletchings than those from the later medieval period, and they're often cut in a hog's back profile, which allows you to get 2 fletchings out per feather, which is very efficient. What I'll do is I'll stick those down with hide glue, bind them on with linen, and cover the binding with beeswax. The spikes will be useful whilst shooting at the butts to make sure they stick in, and also whilst hunting to ensure that the arrow doesn't skid off the target.